Immigrant Redditors. Any funny culture shock stories? Story 1. My parents immigrated from Korea to Germany during the early 70s. They met in Germany. During the first year, my mom was too afraid to eat anything of that weird German food. She depended on rice she bought through friends and the veggies she was able to identify. In the end, she got fed up and decided to visit a supermarket. While browsing the lane, she noticed a horrible smell wavering around. She first thought that somebody had puked but couldn't see any evidence of that. In the end, she ran away because the smell was too unbearable. And that was how she got introduced to cheese. My father immigrated with a few friends, and during the weekend, they would explore the city. One of his friends started to get a cold and didn't want to bother the others, but they convinced him that it would be fine. He could wear a surgery mask like they used to do in Korea when they got sick, and to make him feel less awkward, nobody in Germany seemed to wear masks, they just coughed into their hands. Everybody in the group would wear one. So they go around looking for masks, but all they find are weird-shaped ones without the cords to fix them. Anyway, they improvise and hit the town. They ignore the strange looks and laughs they get from everybody and enjoy the sights of the city. It took a while to figure out what had happened. Turns out they had bought and worn sanitary pads. Story 2. My uncle had just immigrated to upstate New York in the late 70s. He and some other Turkish friends were desperately homesick and longing for his hala's famous sarma, stuffed grape leaves. They were driving down the road on some back roads, and to their utter amazement, they saw an abandoned winery in a field of grape leaves. They immediately pulled over and started gathering as many leaves as they could so they could make sarma that night. Well, someone American must have driven by and reported it because not 15 minutes later, multiple squad cars pulled up and cops came rushing out with guns drawn. Turns out an old lady had reported that a bunch of Mexicans were in a field off the road harvesting MJ plants. Apparently, the cops were nearly crying with laughter once they figured out what was actually going on. My uncle and his friends, not so much. Another story is my dad first getting into New York City in the early 60s. He had just gotten done serving in Korea as a NATO peacekeeper. He was a Turkish commando and was on his way to America to work as a designer for Bloomingdale's. Go figure, right? Anyways, he gets into a cab outside of JFK and his broken TV taught English manages to get the cabbie to drive him to Dale's. When he gets there, my dad pulls out his wallet and asks, "How much?" The cabbie coolly responds, $6. My father is perplexed. He asks again, $6, man. At this point, both were out of the car as the cabbie was getting my dad's luggage. My father is baffled at this point and starts looking under the car and in the back seat. The cabbie asks him if he lost anything, and my father, frustrated, finally blurts out the most broken Turkish you can imagine. "I don't have any boxes. This monkey business. I pay American dollars." While shaking his wallet at the cabbie. With a smile, the cabbie reaches for my dad's wallet and calmly and deliberately pulls out $6 while counting $1, $2. My dad is so embarrassed that he hands the cabbie a 10 and without thinking says, "Thank you." The cabbie, "You too, I think." Come to think of it, I could go on all day with these stories. I love how he didn't even try to give money first, like normal cabs everywhere else just went straight to the trunk to look for boxes. Story 3. I used to work with someone who came from Turkey. He told me this story about when he came to America in the 1970s. When I grew up in Turkey, I was told the Greeks were not human. They told me in the public schools that Greeks were the result of demons that had taken advantage of women or stolen Turk babies in the dead of night and raised them like demons. I was told Greeks' eyes glowed in the dark, they could jump like crickets to snatch up Turk children from their homes at night. They didn't have tongues like humans did. A Greek was some horrible thing, neither human nor full demon, cursed to walk the earth. When I came to America, I knew nobody. One of my friends was from an Armenian part of town in New York. I was scared and intimidated all the time, but he told me to stand up for myself and not be ashamed because I was from somewhere else. He told me how to find work, and if I worked hard and studied English, I would make it. And he was right. By the 1980s, I was doing really well. One day, he came to me to announce he was getting married. To whom? I wondered. He said to a beautiful Greek girl who had just moved here. I was shocked. "You are marrying a Greek? Why?" And he told me, "Because I am Greek. Her family is friends with my family." I didn't know what to say. My friend for all these years was a Greek. I could have never succeeded without him, and he knew I was Turkish. When I confessed my shock, he said, "This is America. We're Americans. We leave all the nonsense behind." I wept because for the first time I realized how small my world had been. He wept with me. Then I learned that he had been told the same thing about the Turks that I had been told about the Greeks. And yet he helped me. We're still best friends to this day, but I can never tell my family back home.
Oh my God! What is that?
If you two are asking what that is, it's the sponsor of today's video, Rufus Rugs. We've been hard at work, creating the best quality and premium hand-tufted rugs money can buy. Now there's a chance you own a carpet that looks something like this. Let's just be real, it's time for an upgrade. And luckily for you, me and the boys from Rufus Rugs are at your service. We don't make those average cheap quality looking rugs. Nope, not gonna happen. Each one is handcrafted to perfection. No shortcuts, no robot assembly lines, and no dropshipping BS. Just pure rug grind. Whether you love anime, sports, cars, or anything else you can think of, we can turn it into a rug. So click the first link in the description and have your custom idea come to life. Story 4. Peruvian here. Getting to parties on time. This is the ultimate statement of lameness in my country, but it's common and even expected in certain parts of the US. Also, it's lame as hell when parties end around 2 to 3 a.m. Most of the time, this is when the party starts to heat up in my country. But in the UK, you have to leave at 12 to catch the tube, and most if not all of the clubs close around 3 a.m. I visited the UK a couple of years before I went to the US, and I can say the swearing customs were very different. One that I liked: it's totally cool to ride the tube or bus wasted in the UK, as long as you don't disturb anybody, even if it's a weekday or 7 p.m. I used that one quite a lot when I was there. Back in Peru, it would have to be past 12 for it to be okay, even though you're expected to take a cab. Something I've noticed in several parts of the US, people will have what I call the 3-layer system. One outward layer of niceness, then a wall, and then finally friendship. Weirded out some locals at first, thinking everyone was my friend. Kissing on the cheek as a greeting is not okay, apparently. When I was in the UK, I hung with a very diverse crowd. I remember a specific day when I greeted some girls in my group the way I used to, kissing the cheek, and they were cool with it. They were Spaniards, Italians, Brazilians, and Uruguayans. And then I inadvertently did the same with a Korean girl, and she got red as hell and put a deer in the headlights face. I apologized, but she would just look to the floor. I felt really guilty. Feels bad, man. The same thing happened again with a couple of girls in the US, but they were cool about it and thought of it as exotic. Story 5. One Halloween many years ago, a few of my buddies and I hit up an apartment complex near where we grew up to rake in the easy free candy. This apartment complex was predominantly filled with Indians, the dot-in-the-head kind, not the run-ins with wolves kind, many of which recently just came to the country to start a new job in IT. So I knocked on the door and patiently waited for my treat when one of the less liked kids in my group decided to jump right in front of me to get first dibs. The door opens and out comes this completely confused-looking Indian guy, who was probably no older than 25 or 26. We shout, "Trick or treat!" as we shove our half-filled pillowcases into his face. He stares blankly for a second, says, "Trick?" in a low voice while slowly reaching into my jerk friend's bag and taking out a piece of candy. Then he slowly just takes a step back into his apartment and closes the door. Good times. I don't know about you guys, but I would totally pretend that I was a recent immigrant to get away with that. Story 6. When I was in high school, a student in my class told us the story of his family's first night in America. They were from China and moved into a house on October 31st, more commonly known as Halloween. They'd never heard of this American holiday. The entire evening, there were people dressed up in crazy costumes coming to their door and ringing the doorbell, and the family had no idea why. He said they spent much of the night huddled together under a table with all the lights off in the house, completely terrified. Oh God, I can't believe this is real. A family hiding from kids covered in white blankets or wearing eye patches holding plastic swords. If you don't want to experience the fear that they did, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Story 7. When I was 20, I used to wash cars as a side hustle. One day I received a call from one of my town's lawyers. She was 15 years older than me. I thought she was hot, but I was minding my own business. Washed her car once and everything went normal. I kept washing her car and her husband's on a regular basis. One night, I see her at a bar alone with friends and she calls me and pays me a drink. Yes, the drinking age where I live is 18, like in a normal country. We kept drinking and she invited me for a walk, to which, tipsy as can be, said yes. During the walk, we were walking past a cemetery. She stopped and dared me to jump the fence. I did, like an idiot. After laughing at me, she too jumped the fence, grabbed my hand and started running. I was lost and kind of weirded out. It was 1 a.m. and I was running around laughing with this hot lawyer. The moon was full, the night was very starry and quiet. We were walking, laughing, when all of a sudden she stopped, looked at me, pointed and said, "There!" It was a big white marble crypt with plenty of light being shed on it by the full moon. She lets go of my hand and starts walking towards it, looks back at me and tells me, "Come." She sits on top of it and as soon as I approach, grabs me, lowers herself, and you know what happens next. We spent a solid hour or two, like hungry wolves preying on each other. After that night, we kept going to the same spot for the next 5 to 6 months, having fun in some grandma's crypt. Never got caught, and her husband never found out because he was always traveling. I called it quits and moved out of the country. I haven't seen her in over 10 years. Story 8. Freedom in the UK. Coming here from Palestine 13 years ago was eye-opening. I have lived in a refugee camp, as have my parents after their parents had to flee their village in what is now Israel. They were under constant attacks from Zionist armed gangs, so they had to flee to refugee camps in Syria, Lebanon, or other parts of Palestine. After moving here, it was insane. The feeling of going in between towns in the UK without having to go through checkpoints and searches by some army from a neighboring country is something you guys seem to take for granted. The simple freedom of going to the train or bus station and just going to London for a day and night out without seeing army men or even armed police was mind-blowing. Also things like malls and shopping centers, and the quality of life. I am classed as working class here, but I feel like a king when I hear or speak to my cousins back home or in Lebanon. Also, how your religion doesn't matter, and ethnic origin. This is amazing. In Lebanon or Syria, people have to sometimes pretend they're Sunni or Shia, etc. In the UK, I tell people I'm a British Arab, and no one gives a crap. Sorcery, I say. There are tons of professions people of Palestinian origin are not allowed to do in Lebanon. Oh, and the cafes are things here. They feel and look more classy. Law and order here is pretty mind-blowing. I remember the curfews enforced by the Israeli army and refugees in cities in the West Bank. None of that here. Also British weather. Seriously, screw the heat, man. I like cold weather, rain, and gloomy skies. Oh god, I love it here. Oh, and one more thing. The feeling of unity within Europe is heartwarming. Back home, our brothers in Islam are bathing in oil money whilst acting strictly Islamic to their own people, whipping them and arresting them for petty stuff. Screw those jerks. Liking cold weather, rain, and gloomy skies, they really have become a Brit. Story 9. Oh goody, culture shock. I love me some culture shock. I'm a cross of everything on the planet. I've been born in the US, then moved to Spain at a young age, and then moved to England just recently to work. This means that my English is 99.9% perfect most of the time, but that on that 0.1% remaining, I'll flunk it on the basis of US or UK English contrasts or butchered Spanish-English translations. The first example of this was the first time I came to the UK to meet my partner's family. It happened to be an extremely cold March, and apparently, every virus in the country had been waiting at the airplane's door to greet me. Needless to say, I turned into a sloppy mess of a person who went about life trying to keep as much of her dignity as a person with 2 tissues up her nostrils can. In the event of this, I asked my partner to take me to the pharmacy to get some cold meds. On the way there, and because it sounded like a good icebreaker, I decided to open my pie hole to say the only thing that sounded right at the time. Oh god, I'm so constipated. Worth a mention of the fact that constipado in Spanish means congested or to have a cold. Nowhere in my head did anything else make sense. My partner, who I hadn't been with very long at all, gave me a side glance from the steering wheel without saying a word. Once we got to the pharmacy, he led me over to the cold and flu meds and then pointed in the general direction of the laxatives aisle. I've never felt hotter. The second occasion was again in England, this time in his house. Early on in the day, I'd put on a wash with some of my clothes, namely some jeans had gotten muddy while walking around. Strangely enough, because it's not like it ever rains in England. Nope, it doesn't. When I went back to check if the cycle had finished, I found out someone had removed my clothes and put them somewhere else. This prompted me to go around the house, calling out for my partner loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear me shout, "Have you seen my pants?" Fun fact, did you know that in the UK, pants mean undergarments? Fun fact too, did you know that the first thing that goes through your father-in-law's head when you're screaming for your undergarments around the house isn't that you've lost your jeans? So, ignorance and bliss and all that. Story 10. I have a pretty funny culture shock story from when I moved overseas to live for 2.5 years. I'm American and lived in a small village or suburb with a Muslim family that spoke no English whatsoever. They had no prior experience with foreigners and I was going to be living with them for 3 months. The family was extremely nice, but initially, communication was a bit of a challenge. Eventually, I started getting better with the language and could convey basic caveman sentences such as, "I go now school," and "me hungry, please." Almost every night, my host mom tried to help me get better by quizzing me as best she could. The following is an approximate transcript, one of these language review sessions from the perspective of my traditional conservative Muslim host mom. "Do you like this?" she asks, pointing to an apple. "I like apples." "Do you like that?" she asks, pointing to a fig. "I like bussy a lot." "What? No, don't say that." "What? Bussy?" No, say fig. Bussy. Just don't talk about that food. Later on that afternoon, I passed by my host mom on the phone with one of her friends. She's cracking up laughing, stops me and gives me the phone. "Say what you said earlier." Bussy?" Laughter ensues. I give the phone back to her as she's almost crying laughing and wander to my room confused as hell. It was until the next day's language class that I found out that fig and the slang word for lady parts are one letter off. Story 11. I moved to England from Norway a year ago. I used to make fun of people for buying bottled water. Moved here and I have a full water bottle beside me and an empty one on the table. I can't drink the tap water here without getting nauseous. Strangers talk to me. I mean, I live in London, so not that much. But strangers will talk to me on buses, while queuing, still the hardest word for me to spell, waiting at the bar in the pub, while in the shop, and it freaks me out because I'm so bad at small talk and I can only talk about the weather for like 5 minutes. Speaking of shops, they bag the shopping for you. Been here a year, just getting used to it. I refused to go shopping without my boyfriend for a good 5 months, because it was such an awkward experience just standing there holding my money while they did all the packing, and I still refused to buy razor blades or rubber in a normal shop because I have to ask for them. All the cheese here has a rubber aftertaste. I miss going into a pub and asking for a drink and getting handed a pint of the local lager. I cannot for the love of God master the hello routine that is, "Hi, how are you doing?" and the appropriate answer. And if I'm the one greeting, it's usually a stumbly, "Hi, how's you?" Girls will hug me after talking to them once, and I'm expected to hug people I can't even remember talking to. No matter what I say as a greeting, the second question will either be, "So where are you from?" or "Are you from Ireland?" I have neither a very strong Norwegian accent nor an Irish accent, but I do have red hair and green eyes. After saying I'm from Norway, they will compliment my English when it was obviously my poor English that got them asking. Feels like a backhanded compliment every time. I feel like the most awkward person on the planet some days. Story 12. I moved to the US from Venezuela when I was around 6 or 7. In Venezuela, they're a lot more lax about alcohol. Almost all of my cousins were allowed to have a drink at family gatherings by the time they were 12, for instance. No one really cares as long as your 9-year-old kid isn't getting messed up. And it's common for parents to allow their kids to have a sip at young ages, which is understandable. Watching a kid's reaction to hard stuff is freaking hilarious. But anyways, probably within a week of getting to the US, we're at a Chili's or Applebee's, one of those types of restaurants. It was 15 years ago, so that information has been lost to time. My dad lets me have a sip of his drink every now and then over the course of the dinner. He didn't notice, however, that the elderly couple next to us noticed it first, and became increasingly uncomfortable every time I reached over and had a sip. Apparently I liked it, who knew? Eventually, one of them must have talked to the manager or something because he came over and politely, I guess, asked us to step out of the restaurant. Oh, and apparently smacking someone with a lunch tray because you didn't like them on the first day of kindergarten is apparently frowned upon in the US. That was a pretty big today I learned moment for me. Hitting people with lunch trays seems like it would be frowned upon everywhere. Story 13. Didn't happen to me, but in 1991, when the Soviet Union was newly opened, I hired 2 young Russian women. They were 21 and 24 years old. The older one was a Moscow resident, a university graduate, a lawyer, and soon to be a judge. Not a dumb hillbilly is my point. The other was just a provincial girl. I picked them up at the airport, and while I was driving them to their workplace, I stopped for gas. I took them to the adjoining convenience store and asked them if they wanted anything to eat or drink. They both said they were hungry, and I told them to take anything they wanted to the cashier and I would pay for it. They just sort of huddled close, staring wide-eyed. I kept telling them to take what they wanted. They didn't move. Eventually, I figured there might be a language barrier and they're seeing brand names for the first time. They probably don't know what is in the packages. I mean, if you saw M&Ms and Pringles for the first time, what would you think? I decided just to continue in the college dorm where they would be housed and feed them there. Weeks later, I asked them why they didn't get any food the first night. They told me they didn't really think it was a store. They thought it was a food museum. They had never seen a clean, bright shop with such an abundance of nicely packaged and neatly on display. Even after they understood, they seemed to distrust the supermarket, thinking they were not really welcome to touch things, take as many items as they wanted, and so on. I would take them to the grocery store expecting them to get a week's worth of things, and they would get each one pepperoni stick or bagel and run to the car. My, how Moscow has changed since then. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What made you laugh the hardest in your entire life? Story 2 was hilarious. See you in that video.